So I'd like to welcome Catherine. Catherine's currently on 2-year secondment to JNCC from NRW. She's got a PhD from in zooplankton in Irish lakes, and she's written a number of papers on Welsh protected areas and UK lake classification, and written a book on rivers in Wales. During her time in JNCC, Catherine has co-founded the National Conservation Policy and Advice Team and worked across a plethora of issues from climate change, protected species and habitats, monitoring, nature-based solutions, and of course, nature recovery networks. So I'm going to pass over to Catherine now.
Okay, fine, I will go for it now. Thank you all very much for coming along. Barda and greetings from the Isle of Anglesey in North Wales. So this review of terrestrial nature networks is very much a joint effort with colleagues in the country conservation bodies in the UK, so Natural Resources Wales, Nature Scot, Natural England, and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland. And it builds on a JNCC-led workshop organised by Ant and myself way back at the start of the first lockdown, and a presentation put together for the Festival of Ecology organised by the BES before Christmas. And more recently, we had an invitation to contribute to the recent Nature Networks meeting in Northern Ireland. So I've been adding bits and pieces to this talk all along. And the main objective is to provide you with an overview of the progress made with nature network development, mainly, well, in all the countries of the UK, so Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England are in there to some degree, and it's supported by publicly available sources of information. And it's important that you appreciate that I'm not going to try and represent the position or interests of any of the particular countries, but they've supplied the information that they're very happy to share with us all today. And I would like to try and attempt to highlight particular areas of interest and potential opportunities for JNCC as we go along. So, next slide. Across the UK, ecosystems face a common set of large-scale environmental pressures related to the things you can think of immediately, like habitat degradation and fragmentation, including climate change and pollution, agriculture and fisheries management, and urbanisation. Following the English landmark Making Space for Nature report, led by Professor Sir John Lawton in 2010, the development of nature networks became widely recognised as a means to support environmental resilience in a changing world. And he challenged us to make our protected areas bigger, better, more joined up. So 10 years later, it seemed like a good time to have a review in the context of the current interest in developing new UK land management schemes post European Union membership, and it's part of preparations for COP26. To create a network represents a potentially unique UK-scale nature-based solution towards mitigating biodiversity loss and climate change. And the report from our interagency workshop on nature networks is available on the JNCC website, and the reference is given here. Well, we began our review by summarising the main legislative and policy drivers for networks across the UK. In Wales and England, the separate Environment Acts provide the key legislative foundations, with additional support from the Resilience Goal in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales. Where country-specific acts are relatively less developed, the focus is on continued international commitments and national and more local plans, policies and strategies. Nature networks have a growing prominence in the UK as a means of addressing the biodiversity crisis and supporting climate change adaptation and mitigation. For example, the vision by 2045 of the Environment Strategy for Scotland is, by restoring nature and ending Scotland's contribution to climate change, our country is transformed for the better, helping to secure the well-being of our people and planet for generations to come. More recently in Scotland, the Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform launched the government's Biodiversity Statement of Intent on the 14th of December. And highlighted in the statement is an indication of the role of ecological networks in the new Scottish Biodiversity Strategy, which will be published 12 months after COP15. It says our new strategy for biodiversity will highlight the need to facilitate the creation of new locally driven projects, such as the Cairngorms Connect project, which aims to improve ecological connectivity across Scotland. So, in general, there is a common UK policy theme around leaving our environment in a better state for future generations. And the annex to our JNCC workshop report collates all the legislation, policies, plans and strategies which link to nature networks in the UK. When I gave the presentation at the recent Northern Ireland meeting, my colleague Richard gave me some pointers to make specifically around Northern Ireland, and they're summarised here. And improving nature recovery networks in many ways is what Northern Ireland has been doing for some time through daily work and their actions. And it's been the overarching theme to the general direction of travel, though not often highlighted as such. In Northern Ireland's Environment Agency strategic priorities, we have two key ones that link with networks. So resilient and diverse ecosystems underpin economic and social health by providing valuable services such as clean water. Realising the full value of our natural and historic environment in all decisions is key to long-term prosperity. And bigger, better, more joined up, as Lawton challenged us to do, has been the impetus for many grant-funded projects like those run by the Woodland Trusts or the Beelines project or the Loughney Partnership. Also small woodland grant schemes and agri-environment schemes. And much of Northern Ireland's environmental policy is now due for review. So it's a good time to try and embed nature recovery network actions. And they have recently had funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund to get this off the ground. And they started doing this by having this whole series of webinars. So it's well worth looking up this webinar series on YouTube, and you will get an overview for specific projects in Scotland, England, and indeed from the Republic of Ireland. So they were all brought together to inform where Northern Ireland goes next. However, the UK picture is a complex mix of legislation, strategies, and plans in relation to nature recovery networks. Our review documented a shared policy ambition, individually held by Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland, to create networks with a strong focus on developing what's called ecological resilience. It was evident that networks will be key to future conservation planning for nature and landscape conservation, and they will address commitments at an international, UK and country level. And at the moment, again, there are opportunities associated with agri-environment schemes, forestry and habitat restoration schemes, and other operational areas within the countries. And private investment in natural capital is also likely to be a key mechanism for nature network delivery, because the project scale is large enough to unlock this type of investment. In some countries, nature networks have been defined in government policy. For example, in Wales, there's a focus on what's called having resilient networks as defined here, which is completely compatible with the Nature-Based Solutions report. So resilient ecological networks are networks of habitat in good ecological condition, joined up by designated sites and other biodiversity hotspots to provide maximum benefits for biodiversity and our well-being. And resilience is the capacity of ecosystems to deal with disturbances, either by resisting them, recovering from them, or adapting to them, whilst retaining their ability to deliver services and benefits now and in the future. In addition, the attributes of resilience, again shown in these little coloured circles, are diversity, connectivity, extent, condition, and they all reflect the original Lawton Challenge. We can look at diversity from different angles, such as natural diversity, with a key role for protected areas, but also to increase structural diversity at different scales and to diversify productive systems. A network would seek to maintain the extent of existing habitats and to restore and create semi-natural habitats. There would be an objective to get protected sites and wider habitats into good environmental condition, to advocate good management generally, and to improve condition of soil, air and water quality. And the final obvious attribute of connectivity relates to maintaining and enhancing the network and improve or reinstate connective features. And I think rivers are clearly a key connecting habitat. There's an example of some of the tentative network maps released by NRW here on this picture. And when I look at this shot of southeast Wales, I can see the way the rivers stand out as linear features, and they are set to make an important contribution to network development. The characteristics of resilience are the foundations of a larger, what's called a DECA framework, shown here, and they are considered measurable. So DECA stands for diversity, extent, condition and connectivity. And these ecosystem attributes are measurable and contribute to the ecosystem resilience. And then you have above those what is called emergent properties around adaptability, recovery and resilience. And they're not so directly measurable at the moment. And together they all produce some indication of overall ecosystem resilience. Have a look at the State of Natural Resources report on the NRW website if you want to see how this framework is applied to make judgments about ecosystems. It's fair to say, I think, that the UK is in a nature network implementation phase, and their development is dependent on the involvement of people, especially local communities, which have their own sense of place and vision for the environment. And this is a Natural England slogan at the moment. Nature networks are about people as much as nature. And guidance is being produced to empower these communities, including principles of network design focused on creating and improving sites and joining them up, building resilience through the restoration of natural processes and incorporation of diversity, and of course, monitoring progress. A similar sort of approach has been taken in Scotland, which has what's called a recipe for success model, and it promotes engaging, planning, doing, evaluating, and sustaining networks and the environment. But again, the focus is on nature and people working together. Bringing these principles together with those put forward by Lawton, we can think of a continuum of conservation approaches and practical management. To successfully establish coherent and resilient networks of conservation areas requires a shift along the spectrum shown here, depending on local circumstances. And I think this is probably one of the key slides I want you to take note of here today. Largely put together by Natural England. And this, I think, is probably the future of nature conservation over the next many decades. The end goal will be to achieve a better balance of managed and natural areas than currently exist. So we're looking at more engagement with people and the environment, more and bigger core protected areas. You know, protected areas will stay with us and should not be thrown out with the bathwater, but managing those sites as networks. You'll see a shift from the traditional focus on vegetation types to a more ecosystem view. And we need to embrace dynamism and change and natural processes and structural and functional and trophic diversity. So where does JNCC fit in here? So I've tentatively put the JNCC logo alongside some of these arrows where I think we may have an opportunity to make a strong contribution. JNCC needs to engage with the diverse audience, especially policymakers at UK and country level, and speak the current language of the environment, from natural resources to natural capital to nature-based solutions, to engaging the general public with nature. But perhaps we can also help the countries with understanding how human behaviour and motivations can be used to help protect nature. And again, we must be very mindful of the important and key foundational role of protected areas. SSIs still represent our core sites, and we are responsible for the guidelines for selection of biological SSIs, which have just recently been revised. But how long will they be fit for purpose as climate change increases and species start to move? I don't know the answer to that question. In theory, we can continue to monitor individual features such as species as they move north or increase in altitude, but we know we can't afford it, which is why we are developing a risk-based approach to monitoring, and JNCC could play an important role here too. Although what I've presented up to now has had a very strong terrestrial focus, the concept of networks and connectivity also apply to the marine environment, and JNCC's responsibility for marine protected areas will be especially important. In some ways, we might assume that the marine environment is even more connected, but I suspect some elements are, but not all of them. So going back to the Natural England guidance, there's a final section in that document which provides an overview of a number of tools and mapping data sets that could be useful in helping to plan networks and to make decisions around them. There are descriptions of their capabilities and suggestions on how they might be used. Different methods and models are being used, and this is not necessarily a cause for concern, but at some stage we do need to assess the effectiveness and outcomes from our activities. In a changing world, it could be seen to be an advantage to be using different approaches because we're not sure which ones are really going to work at this stage. To give you a scale of the effort here, on the 5th of November, Natural England, in association with 600 organisations, launched the Nature Recovery Network Delivery Partnership. It is the biggest initiative to restore nature ever to be launched in England, and is part of the government's 25-year environment plan. There is a commitment to restore protected sites and to create new wildlife-rich habitats in towns and countryside for people to enjoy. Other projects by individual conservation charities will also form part of the UK effort, such as many of the large-scale river restoration projects underway, and other examples might be the Bee Lines project promoted by BugLife. So again, a very strong focus on restoring nature in association with local communities and people. There's good news from Wales as well, because in March of this year, Welsh Government announced a £9.8 million boost for Wales biodiversity. And this was a fund aims to strengthen the resilience of Wales's networks of protected land and marine sites, supporting a green recovery for nature and communities post-pandemic. And it's an interesting funding model where Welsh Government has come together with the National Heritage Memorial Fund to secure the resources together. In Ireland, a consultation has just closed on the Peace Plus funding programme. And this is a new funding programme designed to support peace and prosperity across Northern Ireland and the border counties of the Republic of Ireland, building upon the work of previous peace and Interreg programmes. And it has an indicative budget of €1 billion. It has 6 themes, including supporting a sustainable and better connected future, which encompasses wildlife, including nature networks, climate change and coastal areas, and pollution, especially water pollution. Borders and seas do not really divide us, but provide us with an incentive to work together. And this fund represents a very valuable opportunity to bring an international dimension to UK nature conservation effort. From an ecological and biogeographical point of view, it would make sense in a changing world for us to work together on our archipelago of islands in the Atlantic. And you will all appreciate my bias as a Republic of Ireland citizen in making some of these remarks. Novel funding models are also being developed, especially as part of post-pandemic green recovery. And this 1 billion challenge from Scotland is probably one of the most ambitious. If you accept that we generally know what we need to do for nature and that it will cost a lot of money, this fund seeks to address the chasm of incomprehension between what we nature conservationists and potential investors. A set of 7 potential funding arrangements listed here have already been proposed, and they're at various stages of development, and they are matched against the delivery of Sustainable Development Goals. It is hoped that there is potential to generate £1 billion for biodiversity through this combination of investments, levies, loans, innovative payments, and blended finance opportunities. And landscape scale opportunities are a key priority that can drive impact and test these investment concepts at scale and support the rural economy sustainably for the longer term. So this is certainly a very important initiative from the Scottish Wildlife Trust and SEPA in terms of new funding directions. The conceptual thinking about nature networks is not confined to the UK. The IUCN and the Convention on Biological Diversity have given us a global perspective on this area of work, including these through critical definitions of ecological networks, which bring together protected areas and what are called OECMs, connected by ecological corridors. So OECMs are defined here, they're geographically defined as areas other than a protected area, which is governed and managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for conservation of biodiversity with associated ecosystem functions and services. So you can imagine they're the kind of bits in between protected areas. It's important to remember that there's a global scale to network development, and published in July, this IUCN document is a very good starting reference for anybody interested in learning more about networks. It provides a common set of definitions and language with a focus on the unimpeded movement of species and the flow of natural processes. And the scientific review which underpins this report confirms that interconnected protected areas are much more effective than disconnected areas in human-dominated systems, especially in the face of climate change. And the IUCN showed that countries on every continent have advanced various forms of corridor legislation and policy to enhance connectivity. And they consolidated the science into guidance on best practice alongside case studies from a wide variety of terrestrial, marine, and mixed environments. JNCC links with IUCN will be very important here, and JNCC could help to translate some of these concepts into the UK environment, such as the role of OECMs in terms of definition, common standards, monitoring, and condition assessments. The aims of the IUCN guidance on OECMs is set out above and include things like governance, ecological representative areas, increasing the coverage of them, supporting the recovery of threatened species and enhancing connectivity, and again, fostering engagement with the public and stakeholders to support livelihoods and to address climate change issues. So multiple benefits are clearly being promoted. The guidance also includes an in-depth analysis of the components of an OECM definition shown in the previous slide. Like, what do we mean by other than a protected area or a geographically defined area? And work is ongoing on the methodology to identify these OECMs. So returning to the UK and returning to our review of networks, let us look at the key evidence needs. Without doubt, ecological research will further define our understanding of the concept of nature networks and indeed of the concept of ecological resilience. At the moment, there's a high dependency on available land use and land cover data and key abiotic data sets, with a strong expectation that Earth observation will provide a common standard in future. An increasing number of separate network modelling programs and mapping tools are being used to produce a variety of spatial projects at different scales. Other research needs relate to climate change, local ecosystem service delivery, and social science. How do we best talk about nature and influence human decision-making? Monitoring is crucial to demonstrating network development and success, and there is a need to focus on defining indicators of resilience. Habitat network maps have already been published as a key resource by some of the countries. Equally, the lack of evidence should not delay action, but we do need project assessment frameworks to inform adaptive management. In general, our review recognised that a fundamental challenge relates to the public appreciation of biodiversity and ecosystem services. Although the pandemic has certainly increased our awareness of the important role of nature to human well-being, the place-based or local policy emphasis comes with a key test of delivering national or regional objectives at a local scale, which should be kept under review. There's a great expectation by government that they can empower the local communities to start to deliver these things on the ground. But again, it needs to be compared at a later date as to how effective they are in terms of delivering larger and more national strategies. Nature networks are also well placed to contribute to a green and just recovery post-COVID. Funding sources are clearly in transition and are diverse in nature, and they need to support long-term landscape scale work and include adaptive management and monitoring. Some landowners are understandably concerned with the risk associated with adaptive management, so there is a need for expert advice and training and having those practitioners that can get involved in these large-scale projects on the ground. And finally, nature network projects should be considered living laboratories or experiments that have the capability of attracting funding to deliver solutions to environmental challenges, but also to support environmental education. Before I finish, I would like to highlight this landmark nature-based solutions report launched last week by the British Ecological Society, but with contributions from over 100 experts, drawn mainly from the academic community, but also the conservation agencies and NGOs. Christine attended the launch, and Gemma also highlighted the report in her recent blog. This report sets the scene for the COP meetings this year and provides a valuable assessment of potential for a range of habitats to deliver sustainable nature-based solutions to our current challenges. Not surprisingly, peatlands emerge as the superstars in terms of carbon storage. Other ecosystems were examined, including woodlands, grasslands, marine, freshwater, arable, and urban areas. And one of the key messages was that the multiple benefits of nature-based solutions require careful spatial and project planning to deliver multi-sectoral benefits. And nature recovery networks were specifically mentioned in this context. So nature networks are going to be part of future spatial planning. The report also outlines a detailed analysis of the tools, financial mechanisms, and policies required for effective delivery in a UK context. Policy change will be necessary to overcome some of the challenges associated with nature-based solutions and to assure that they fulfill their potential. Yet the rewards are vital in meeting national climate change and biodiversity targets. So to conclude from our review, we hope that the available policy opportunities are optimised across the UK and the individual countries in the UK. Again, borders and seas do not necessarily divide us, but give us the incentive to work together. And we recognise that collaborative and interdisciplinary research will be needed to secure the evidence base and specialist advice. And funding programme design will be crucial. Projects need to be large scale and long term. And we are stronger if we work together for nature conservation. Hopefully, by acting locally, we can contribute globally. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That was an absolutely excellent presentation and excellent descriptions of all the legislation, all the work that's happening across the UK and further afield. I'm going to pass over to Joshua to take us through some of the questions that have been submitted.
Thank you, Nikki. And so we have some more questions coming in. So I'm going to start off with the first question is development of habitat opportunity maps for nature recovery networks have been developed in different ways across the United Kingdom at country and county or regional levels. Do you think a stock take and lessons learned process for all these different approaches will happen to improve existing guidance?
That's a good question. I'm not sure it will. And if it does, it would probably happen, I think most likely happen at a country level. I do think the group of people that we put together to do this review really valued the opportunity to come together and to share their knowledge and information. And I would hope that, even when I'm not here, that they will continue to meet. And if that, at least on their own, and if that happens, yes, I would hope that they will be, tracking progress together as it goes along, and doing that sort of review might be developed in future.
Okay, thank you. Another question is the £1 billion fund also associated with the Scottish Government and Nature Scot?
Not sure off the top of my head, but I know that the main players in putting that together were the Wildlife Trust and SEPA. Again, if you look at that link, you should be able to check that.
And another question is, some NGOs have landowner advice roles within the upstream thinking program. Do you see a similar model happening to support nature recovery network work?
Some NGOs, yes. Any of the nature recovery networks, the anticipation would be that they would be delivered not just through the activities of the conservation agencies alone, but with local communities and with local wildlife trusts or river restoration or river trusts or any other nature conservation body locally. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And then finally, Somebody posted a comment saying, "I hear that peat-based compost is being banned."
Yes, I heard that on the radio this morning too.
Was it on the radio? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
This is me. I thought that he was very over the top about the peat, but obviously it's worked.
Yeah, and they did go on to make the point that, you know, commercial peat isn't extracted to the same extent here in the UK. It'll actually have more impact on imports from Ireland. So yeah, and equally, Christian Dunn wrote the peatland chapter for the BES Nature-Based Solution Report, is very much a science communicator and has all these good terms like, you know, peatlands are superstars. So he's very good on the radio.
And Uli's, I don't know if you can see the chat, but Uli's just shared a BBC story.
Yeah. I got another question that's just come through, is how do we best move from managing and/or monitoring at feature level, i.e. habitats and species, to ecosystem scale?
Right, that is a good question. Well, at the moment, our focus is on still on monitoring features and features in protected sites. But you have to think about what movement to an ecosystem scale is a much more challenging job. You will have to be thinking about things like structure and function and how that is likely to vary in the future and change and how it relates to ecosystem services. So I can't give you the solution to that off the top of my head. I think there's going to be a whole new generation of ecologists, conservation people who are going to have to tackle that problem. But it is a different job. Okay, are we done?
Yes, I think so, unless anybody has any more questions. Thank you so much again. That was absolutely excellent to learn more about nature recovery networks.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity.